What's going on, guys? How are you? How are you guys doing? What's up, Frazier? How are you, man? Um, you and I, we can do that another time. I would love to another time, um, for sure. Lots of prayer is definitely needed. Hi, Kellogg. Hi. Hello. Summer. Hi. What's going on? Oh, not much. We are gonna be diving into the Book of Ruth and finishing that book, and um, we'll tie it into a lot of different things tonight. So it's pretty good. It's this book is really neat. It is really neat. What's up, Coffee Queen? Hi. How are you doing, Coffee? Are you a different Coffee? Because there was a Coffee Girl, and now uh, keep going. Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, no. Are you a different Coffee Girl? Are you Coffee Girl and you just renamed yourself? I can't. Or are you a new Coffee Queen? Either way, I'm completely on the on the team Coffee. I love coffee. I already had 2 cups. 2 cups. Coffee keeps me going. Oh, you changed the bag. Okay. What are we talking about? Hi, Deborah. We are going to be talking about the Book of Ruth. We're going to finish chapter 3 and 4 tonight and tie it into Revelation chapter 5. And hopefully you guys see it in a completely different light. If you guys missed Ruth chapters 1 and 2, I will do a recap before we get into chapters 3 and 4. And that's typically how I go about things. I always do a recap just in case anybody missed what we went over. It's just a brief recap, but repetition kind of drills it into our brain. So that's kind of why I go about that way. But um, hello, Holly. Oh, oh man, I'm not a girl, but privileged, John. I'm too old to be coffee girl. Okay, yeah. It definitely gives you putting girl in your name different ideas. Yep, I agree with you. So I guess that means I should not be coffee boy. Ooh. I'll just stick with sheesh. It's kind of a timeless name, back when there was like 1820s, they were all walking around saying hello sheesh, and sheesh. I'm totally making all that up, but I like my name. Hello Coffee King. There you go. There you go. I mean, oh man, I just love coffee so much. I actually got out of my truck today, and somebody was nearby, and it was kind of cool, like a cool temperature out. And I got out, and the first thing I said to him as I was holding my coffee, I said, "Man, this weather just hits different, and it makes you enjoy coffee so much more than what you normally would." So, the weather, like the cool, like you just got and then you got a cup of coffee. Ah, don't you get me started. um, but yeah, how are you guys doing? You guys do anything cool today? I'm probably gonna start. Holly, how are you? I was catching up on all the things that happened. Israel's popping off, and hopefully you guys are keeping them in your prayers because I'm telling you what, guys, it is getting absolutely bananas. It really is. Doing well. Thanks for asking. Good. That makes me happy. It's good to get some good news. Like in a world filled with terrible news every time you turn on the TV or radio or whatever, it's all bad. So, um, yeah, it's good to have some good stuff flowing in. And what we're doing here is really good. So I want you guys to focus on that. when you can, because it's easy to get overwhelmed by all the happenings of the world. And when you're so into the Bible, it's just better. You're lighter, if that makes sense. So hopefully you guys are able to maintain that perspective. But yeah, it's getting really crazy over in Israel. Looks like they're obvious. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but ground invasion. They're going in. They've been spreading propaganda. They've been flying overhead, dropping all kinds of pieces of paper that say, "Hey, you guys need to leave," because the guys who are in charge of Gaza, like the Hamas guys, they are lying to their civilians, and they don't want their civilians to leave. So they're telling them the opposite of what their message is trying to be portrayed. And so Israel has been, littering the ground with propaganda saying, hey, you got to get out, you got to get out, you got to get out. So it's really interesting to see. Hopefully you guys can remember that when you're going about, like, hey, what's real, what's not. Just keep in mind that it's like we're being deceived no matter what we do, but keep in mind that you need to be hyper vigilant. But it's just like that's a perfect scenario right there, because all the people, the civilians in Gaza, like a lot of them are like, hey, I want to get out of here. But then their leaders are saying, no, you got to stay. And they're not saying, like, they're back and forth, back and forth. They don't know what to believe. So it is, it's crazy. It's crazy. Such a information warfare. Hop, skip, jump, hello. I'm going to put you guys on pause for 1 second. All right. I'm trying to stay prayed up and not be deceived. Yeah, that's good. Prayer is huge. Keep doing that. Keep doing that. So I've heard this from my mother and my son-in-law. Are we in World War III? That's an interesting question right there. I would say it's some people would say that started back when they released a virus on us. And there's all kinds of different debate on that, but you can definitely make an argument one way or the other. Officially, the news is not saying anything, so if that's what you go off as an official, then technically we are not. But you can definitely make a very, very solid argument that we are. Information warfare is a big one, a part of that casualty as well. Hi, Diana. Hello. What's up, David? How are you? What is that? Looks like a snail. I think we have been. Yeah. I think we are in rumors of wars. Hi, Ginger. Yeah, the rumors of wars. And I don't know exactly. Matthew 24, but the end is not yet. That's what you were going. Hi, Melly. Kimmy, hi. Hold on. Just starting tonight? Yes. Yep, just started. I hope you just started. I just started. We haven't even started yet. We're about to start diving in here in probably like 5 minutes, see if anybody else is coming. And if not, they can join and catch up. I'll post it all on YouTube. It's all good either way. Thank you, because I'm scared to death, to be honest. I was trying to explain things to my grandchild. Yeah. There's a lot going on. It's really difficult to really grasp the entire concept of really the severity of it all. But it is mind-blowing when you really look at it. Pay attention to Turkey. I've been watching them just because Turkey's been like a question mark in my mind for a long time, just because they wanted to be a part of NATO. Like, it's like now they're making all these bold statements. But what's interesting about them geographically is that they're a bridge, and it's like a strategic it's a strategic bridge for all these armies to come through to make their way down towards Israel, just for convenience sake and whatnot. And I think it's interesting that recently they made a stand against Israel, because they came out and they're very pro Hamas, and it is. I'm telling you what, guys, it's very interesting. And whenever you start seeing, you're seeing buildings put up the Star of David and saying no Jews allowed. You're seeing it's like the underlyings of a Holocaust, right? Of another one coming up, and you know, about 1/3 of the Jews were killed during the first Holocaust, and the Book of Zechariah talks about how the next time around will be 2/3 of them will be destroyed, and that's a lot. That's a lot of people. So it's also interesting to note that Damascus was bombed again by Israel. That's in Syria, so that's interesting because Damascus will be wiped out completely uh, at some point in the future. We don't know when, but that is going to occur sometime, and that is good to see you. But that's going to happen sometime in the future, and they them bombing Damascus, it's nothing new. They've been doing it for like years, but you're seeing how they're just like poking the bear, poking like little by little. Like, what's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back? So I'm at work, but I'll be in and out. Okay, Michelle, been watching you on YouTube and loving it. Nice, Dana, awesome. That is so cool. I always wonder, like I don't know if anybody watches it. I know they're like 5 hours long, so it's kind of difficult. So anytime somebody watches it, I always wonder. Thanks, Leah. Am I super late? No, we haven't even started yet. Hi, Savannah. I always wondered if people like watch the whole thing or if they just watch or they scrub through and get to the point. I don't know. That's a lot of time to pretty much sit down and listen to me just ramble. So I'm glad you're watching it. I'm making frosting and listening. Oh, making that cake. I bet it's gonna be good. Phantom, hi. Have you heard people saying they think, yeah, absolutely, KB. I kind of subscribe to that kind of thought if I had to guess. Not that it matters, because I also believe that the church is going to be gone before the Antichrist is revealed. I watched Ruth, you uploaded, so I'd be up to date. Oh, did you watch it? Hey. Yes, sir. Hi, Katie. Hi. Yes, long video, but it's worth it. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much for and taking the time or taking the anxiety edge off a little. Yeah. It's easy, really. You start scrolling through and you just like people convince you that the world is going to fall apart and whatever. And I always, if you've been here, then you know that I believe that the rapture could occur in our lifetime. And I still believe that. Like, that hasn't changed. I'm never going to put a date on anything, but I do believe that the rapture is, I could see it happening in my lifetime just because of, how many things are happening one after another. If you guys rewind 10 years ago, it was like, or let's go back 20 years ago. If you rewind 20 years ago, there was one major thing happening every 2 to 3 years, maybe. But now, within the past 3 years or 4 years, it's been one major thing has almost been happening like every other day, it seems, and it's just speeding up. You're seeing it getting faster and faster and faster and faster, and it's kind of laying the foundation for bigger and worse things to come. Just speaking about towards the earth, but you know what? It's just that's one of the reasons why I believe that. The other reason is because I believe that our children are completely under attack, and I don't think that I don't think many children have a chance, much of a fighting chance nowadays, because when people send their kids to public schools, they get indoctrinated. The ideology that they're being introduced to right now, they don't have a chance. They don't, the teachers don't have a voice most times. It seems like private school or even homeschooling is pretty much the only option. But there's a lot of different things there. But the way I see it is that kids are going to be our hereafter. And so fast forward 15 years into the future, and all those kids that are being taught are now calling the shots. I mean, how do you see our world here in 15 years? Because those kids that are now 15-year-old kids that are being taught this stuff will soon be 30 years old, and they're going to be raising their own kids. And, it's just, we're not going to get any better. We are on fast forward, pretty much mind blowing this new world. Hi, Katie. Hi, Christine. Is that Bob? Hi, Bob. Birth pains. Yes. Hey, oh, I really hope that you are quoting from that one TikTok video I have pinned. What's up, Bob? How you doing, man? Oh man, that's funny. I know at least 4 people that are watching on YouTube besides myself. Nice, Amber. Hi, how are you? Um, encourage more viewers to share. Oh, hi, Katie. Enjoying your Sabbath. Oh man, long time no see. Hi, Blondie. Hello. This is why I'm good with the Rapture. Yes, very, very good. Man, I'm so ready. Very scary. I say this all the time. Yeah, it is terrifying. But yeah, you nailed it. Fast forward for sure. We're on fast forward. Haven't been feeling well, running a slight fever after the surgery. Yeah, Christine. Guys, in case you guys forgot, Christine just had her surgery, and she is going to be um, in recovery for about 6 to 12 months, and she's going through the gauntlet right now. I was trying to encourage her a little bit since she's going to have a lot of not moving around time to use that time to just sit still and dive into the Word, because we can turn everything back towards God, and so hopefully she can do that. It's going to be difficult, it's going to be frustrating not being able to move how she used to, but um, that's just another reason why to look forward to heaven, because there is going to be no more pain, no more sorrow, and I am telling you what, looking forward to it. I've been doing Daniel on YouTube. Oh man, that is such a good book, KB. Back surgery is no joke. No. Good news about Revelation. Yeah, Andrew, absolutely, man. Okay, so we can go ahead and dive on in. Yeah, I bet. All right, so the book of Ruth. I'm just going to do a quick recap on what we went through. We already covered Ruth chapter 1 and chapter 2, but the book of Ruth, it starts out and occurs during the period of the judges. So Samuel is the judge, the primary judge during this time. So it's in that weird spot where there's no king that's on the scene. King Saul is going to be the first king of Israel. He has not yet been appointed. And so that is where we're in. We're in between in this little limbo stage, because there's no king, but there's a judge. They're the ones who basically resided over everything and handled all of the quarrels and all the arguments and all the crimes and whatnot. But there is no king of the land. And so that is why chapter 1 starts out in the time of the judges, is what I think it says in verse 1. Yeah, in verse 1 it says, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. So this is the time where the judges ruled and there were no kings. There hasn't been a king yet. So Genesis through the book of Ruth, there's no king. So all these books that Ruth back to Genesis, 0 kings. But that is the time that we are currently in. But it's also interesting to note that Ruth is why Bethlehem is referred to as the city of David, because Ruth and Boaz end up getting married, and then Boaz ends up becoming, I think it's the great grandfather of King David. So that's why it's called the city of David, because this occurs in that time. This is his homeland, and that is pretty neat. But it's also, so moving on in the first chapter of Ruth, there you're introduced to all the players pretty much right off the bat, except for Boaz. But in the first chapter, you're introduced to a guy named Elimelech. He ends up marrying a woman named Naomi. Naomi, her name means pleasant. But as you go throughout the rest of the first chapter, you find that her husband and her two sons actually end up dying. So there, Ruth is stuck with her two daughters-in-law who are from a country called Moab. So Moab back then was what our time in our world we would call that Jordan. And so you have Bethlehem over here, and then you have Moab over here. But during the time, the reason why Naomi moved over to Moab was because there's this massive famine in the land. It was a localized kind of famine, and so they moved out of there to get out of the famine zone so that they could survive and live and whatnot. But it's interesting because famine, we talked about how famine is used in the book of Leviticus, about how famine is used as a punishment, because there's blessings and there's curses that are mentioned in the book of Leviticus. And so you could make an argument about how the famine was because of a curse, because if you go back into the book of Judges, what you see is that there were people in the book of Judges. There's a phrase that's used that's called everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and that is a dangerous world to be living in. So that's what everybody was doing. Everybody was running around doing what was right in their own eyes. And even if it was evil in their own minds, if they thought that this was okay, kind of like our world today. I mean, if you look in America, that's kind of how people operate. It's like, hey, I want to be a fire hydrant today. You know, like that's going to be in their own mind. They're going to do that because they can convince themselves, and it's crazy. And it's basically like the inmates are running the asylum right now. And that's kind of how the vibe was back in the time of the book of Judges. So in the book of Ruth, the book of Ruth and the book of Judges kind of run together, and Ruth is kind of this bright shining spot in the middle of all of this darkness. So when you're going through the book of Judges and then you move to the book of Ruth, it goes from dark to light, because this book is one big beacon of light. And I think it's really neat when you look at it from that point of view. But there is a guy named Elimelech. He ends up dying. Naomi goes to Moab. A little background about Moab. Moab was a pagan, evil kind of people. They were opposite of everything that the Jewish people stood for. And that is where Ruth comes in, and her the other daughter-in-law, her name was Orpah. Orpah, or after Naomi's husband dies and her two sons die, Naomi tells Ruth and Orpah to go away, to go back to their own people. And Orpah doesn't take much convincing, so she ends up leaving. She's like, I'm out of here. So she goes back to her own people and back to her gods, it says in chapter 2. Or no, in chapter 1. She goes back to her gods in chapter 1, verse 15. And her gods, the god of the Moabites, his name was Chemosh. And that's when you do some research about who that god is, you'll find that god accepts human sacrifices. So that is where Ruth comes from. Ruth is a Gentile and Naomi is a Jew. So you have a Jew and a Gentile hanging out together, and Ruth came from that kind of environment. So you can almost imagine, if you use your brain to try to imagine what kind of thought process Ruth had, because when she doesn't know any better. Like, you can almost put yourself in Ruth's shoes. Imagine doing your own thing in your own pagan world, and then all of a sudden Naomi shows up, and then you marry her son, and the next thing you know, you're learning all about Naomi's God, so about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Ruth is being taught everything there is to know about Naomi's God. Naomi is showing her all this love. There's the strong connection between Naomi and Ruth. And one of the coolest passages in this book is in chapter 16 and 17. And in chapter 1, verse 16 and 17, it says, But Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. And so it's really telling when you start diving into that, because when you understand that her God as a Moabite is the God of Chemosh, like, and you understand that that God accepts human sacrifices, and they offer to human sacrifices to that God. In verse 17, where it says, "The Lord do so to me," the Lord there's all capital letters. That's Jehovah. That is the self-existing one. That is what that word means, the self-existing one. So she, in this famous statement here that many people recognize because of how popular it is in the world, even in the secular world, she uses the word Jehovah here, or Yod He Vav He, or Yahweh. And it's very interesting because it shows you the amount of intelligence and insight that she had, because she didn't use her own God. She used Naomi's God. And so it's really neat because Naomi basically won her to the Lord in a sense. And that's really cool because you can almost imagine Naomi being absolute terrible, like a burden, just almost negative Nancy. There's no way somebody's going to want to be around that kind of person. But Naomi, her name was Pleasant, and she had to have been, now we don't get personality, it's hard to really distinguish this kind of stuff, but you can imagine that she had to have been very loving and tenderhearted towards Ruth, because you can't really win somebody otherwise. If you come off brash and hard on people, then they're going to just be like all defensed up, but Naomi, it's almost implied that she was very loving and tenderhearted, and little by little she was able to win Ruth, and give her the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob there. And that is pretty neat. But so that's what's going on there. So then they end up going back to afterwards. Ruth ends up saying, "I'm not leaving you," so she ends up going back to the land of Bethlehem, Ephrathah. And so it's interesting because they ended up getting word that the famine back over there was finally done. So they were living over in the land of Moab for 10 years, and then they actually end up going back to Bethlehem after they received word that the famine was over. So what I need you to understand, because this is going to tie into play for the chapters 3 and 4, is that when when Naomi and Elimelech, when they left Bethlehem, they sold their land. We're going to talk about this later, but they basically gave their land up when they left, and so they transferred everything and they left for 10 years. So now somebody else has possession of their land. So that's important. We'll talk more about that here, but it's important to remember that. So anyways, they end up going back, and then in chapter 2, you're introduced to Boaz. Boaz, his name means "in him is strength," and Boaz was actually one of the pillars. So Boaz has David. Boaz, or not Boaz, Boaz and David, they're related. There's Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David. So the great grandson of Boaz is David. Then David has Solomon. Solomon builds this massive temple, and one of the pillars that is set up within the temple, which is the first temple that was built, one of the pillars within that temple was Boaz. They named that one pillar. There's two pillars. One pillar was named Boaz. The other pillar was named Yakin. And so that is pretty neat. But Boaz's name means "in him is strength." But anyways, in chapter 2, Ruth is gleaning in this field, and what she was doing was she was gleaning behind the actual workers. So she was not a worker. It was part of their welfare system back in the day. All of that is referenced back in the book of Leviticus, because it was the people were told not to glean everything, because they were supposed to leave some stuff on the floor or on the ground for the poor people, for the destitute, for the widows, for these people who of less fortunate, to come up behind the workers and pick up the grain that fell on the ground. and pick it up for themselves. So that is where Ruth is in chapter 2. She's out in the field working from the morning to the evening, trying to get as much food just to survive, because this was not a job. She wasn't getting paid to do this. She was doing this so that her and Naomi could live, because Naomi was up in the like older in age, and Ruth recognized this, and that was one of the reasons why you can make an argument for why Ruth followed Naomi back to Bethlehem, because she wanted to take care of Naomi. So there she is. Ruth is in the field gleaning, and then out of nowhere, Boaz shows up. He pulls his servant to the side, and he says, "Who is that?" And he points at Ruth, and the servant, who is unnamed, says, "That is Ruth the Moabitess." And so that is interesting. So it's a really beautiful picture, because if you look at the story of Ruth as this book is full of types. Okay, so Boaz is a type of Jesus Christ. Now, before I continue with this, I need you to understand that this is an actual story. This is real. This really happened. So don't think that I'm like, this is not an allegory. This really happened, but you can use types to see things in a different kind of way. So Boaz is a type of Jesus. He is not Jesus. He is just a type of Jesus. So Boaz is a type of Jesus. Ruth is a type of the church. Naomi is a type of Israel. The unnamed servant is a type of the Holy Spirit. And we're going to be introduced to somebody else here in Ruth chapter 5. And that's going to be fun to unpack. But there are types within this book that allow you to see things. And at the end of it, you're going to see it. And it's going to be, hopefully, it's just going to be amazing once we are done unpacking it all. But anyways, Boaz looks across the field. He sees Ruth. He's never seen her before. He's like, "Who is that?" The servant says, "That's Ruth the Moabitess." And it's just such a beautiful picture, because Boaz loved her first. And when you look at that from a type point of view, you see Jesus loved you first. And that is exactly what he did for you and I. And it's just so neat. Now, mind you, this story was written. I mean, this story, like 800 years, 900 years. I have no, like 1,000 years before Jesus was born, something insane like that. And it's so cool, because everything in the Old Testament relates to the new. And so a good way to kind of look at this is imagine, because right now in our world, right, the New Testament applies to you and I. That's why most of us stay in the New Testament. Like, if I ask you guys, "Hey, do you know more about the New Testament, or do you know more about the Old Testament?" A lot of you would probably say, "I know more about the New Testament." That's just how it is, because that's what applies to me, so I'm going to focus there. And that makes perfect sense. But what's interesting is if you remove everything about the Old Testament, pick up the Old Testament, throw it away, and act like it doesn't exist, and then try to read the New Testament, you'd be like, "What the heck am I reading right now?" It doesn't make any sense. It only makes sense if you have the Old Testament and the New Testament, and now you and I do, so we can see this kind of stuff. Can you imagine not having the Old Testament and reading the book of John, and John the Baptist is like, "Behold the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world"? Nobody would know what that was referring to, because the Old Testament wasn't there, but they had the Old Testament. The typology was there. It all applied, because Jesus was the Passover lamb, and that's why John said what he said. It's unbelievable. So it's two puzzle pieces that come together perfectly, and it just keeps on going back and forth, and you can learn so much from this kind of stuff. But anyways, Boaz sees Ruth. He says, "Who is that?" That's Jesus seeing us first, loving us first, and it's a beautiful picture. Anyways, in verse 14 of chapter 2, you see that Boaz actually ends up serving her. Boaz is the master of the entire area. Like, this is the top head honcho kind of guy. And he gives this poor lady food. He ends up feeding her. So he provides for her, he feeds her, he serves her, he gives her more than what she needs. She ends up going back to Naomi and says, "Look at all this stuff that I have." Ruth ends up going back home to Naomi with about 9 gallons worth of grain, and that was completely abnormal for that type of work. And Naomi noticed that right away, because right when Ruth shows up and she sees how much she actually had, she's like, "What the heck? What just happened? where were you working? So she says, I worked with a guy, his name was Boaz. And then Naomi, light bulb goes off. She's like, Boaz is a near kinsman or a near relation of us. Or in verse 20 it says, and Naomi said to her, this man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives. And so she starts to connect the dots a little bit on what's going on. And Boaz is clearly looking out for Ruth, and he wants her to come back and says, I don't want you to go anywhere else. I want you to come to this field and keep working here. And he ends up giving his guys some instructions. So it's a really, really neat picture. But that is a brief recap on chapter 1 and 2. So I'm going to read here a little bit. How long he been live? Hey, what's up? The truth you love. Just started. We've just been going through the recap. We haven't covered anything else yet. Old Testament is all about Jesus, and the New Testament is too. Gotta have it all. Yes. I must be the old man out there. Hi, Wendy. I love it all. Me too. No kidding. Oh, it's so good. You are lost there. What? Where am I lost? Help, find me. Alyssa, hello. How are you, Alyssa? Good to see you again. You are wrong there, the part that they sold the land. Huh? I miss you and love you. Okay. Glad I made it this time. Sandy, hello. All right. So that is a recap on chapters 1 and 2. And now we are gonna start going into chapter 3. Glad I stumbled on this. Hi, Becca. Help, find me. I have to be honest, I do need clarity in God's word. Yeah, hey, well, hopefully I can help you out with that. I think I'm covered for anything. Been 40 plus years, no matter what I say. All right. So we are going to go into chapter 3. And so chapter 3, let's go ahead, before we go into chapter 3, let's go ahead and go to Deuteronomy chapter 25. Deuteronomy chapter 25, because this is important to understand the context before we dive in to chapter 3. All right, Deuteronomy chapter 5, 5 through 10. I feel like church is back in the sanctuary. All right. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5 through 10 is what we are going to read. So that's where I'm going to start reading. Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 5 through 10. It says this: if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go in to her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn son which he bears will succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. But if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him. But if he stands firm and says, I do not want to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit in his face, and answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal removed. So, holy smokes, I'm just like, sheesh. So, there you have it, guys. But what we just read in Deuteronomy chapter 25, 5 through 10, is what is referred to as the law of levirate marriage. The law of levirate marriage. And what that is basically is exactly what happened here with the story of Ruth and Naomi, right? So Naomi has a husband, Elimelech. Elimelech ends up dying, and so do her two sons. So now Naomi is a widow, and also Ruth is a widow. So they have no husband, right? They have no husband. But this is what is important to understand because of what we're going to tackle in chapter 3. But in what we just read in Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10, which is called the Levirate marriage, is that basically there has to be 3 conditions in order for this brother to fulfill that duty. So this brother, so let's say you were married to my brother. He ends up dying. So now you come to me. It would have to be you. If you are a woman, you would have to come to me as the man, and you would say, hey, we got to do this. And so I can't do anything as the man. You, as the woman, would have to approach me and tell me that that is what you want. And then I would have the option: do I want to do it, or do I not want to do it? So if I want to do it, I have to be wanting to do it. I have to be willing. I have to be able, and I had to be a near kinsman in order for that to actually take place. So there's a couple things that actually are required in order for that transaction to basically occur. So if I didn't do it, then you would remove my sandal and then you would spit my face. And I'd just be like, I just think of the Ace Ventura, where, if you know what I'm talking about. Okay. Where they come out of the tent and he's just covered in spit because of, anyways, I hope you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, Chicago. Oh man, that's hilarious. I haven't seen that movie in so long. But that's basically what was going on. So what I want you to understand is that the idea here, though, is the law of the Levirate marriage is that if my brother dies and you want to continue the line or whatever, you would have to come to me. I can't go to you and be like, hey, let's do this thing. You, as the woman, if you are a woman, you would have to come to me and initiate it. And you would have to say, hey, let's continue this, because that's how the inheritance is brought back into play. And it's also important that is how they protected their inheritance, because land was basically forfeit in a certain kind of way, but yet not at the same time. And it's a confusing kind of thing. So basically, when Joshua entered the promised land, like the land of Canaan, they divided up the land, right? And so the way it worked was, if I wanted to sell my land, I could sell it to you. But to them, it was never really me selling it to you. It was really just me leasing it to you. And so what I would do is we would write on a scroll how I'd be like, hey, here is my land. Here's the title deed to my land. But then on the back of the scroll, I would write how I could redeem my property, like the rules for me to redeem it. So whatever you and I agreed upon, we would write it on the back of the scroll. And then that way, if I wanted to come get it back, I would read the scroll and be like, oh, I got to do this. And then I could perform those things and then redeem the land. But if I leased it to you, there's something called a Jubilee year. And what that is like, let's say I give you my land. Well, every 50 years would be a Jubilee year. So every 50 years, the land would automatically come back to me, because the land needed to stay in the tribes, right? There's 12 tribes. The land needed to stay within the people. Like, you can't give it away. So if you go back to the book of Deuteronomy, you see that God is very clear. He says, this is my land. That is why it's so interesting that everything over in Israel right now is happening there. It's like, this is nothing really new. They've always hated the Jews. If you've been here at all before, you understand that it's always Satan hates you and I as Gentiles, but he hates the Jewish people, because that is the lineage, that is where Jesus came from, and now he's trying to remove it, because if he can wipe them out, then the things that are going to recur in the book of Revelation can't come to pass. So he's trying his hardest to wipe out the Jews, because if the Jews are gone, then there's not going to be 144,000 during the tribulation, and so then he makes God a liar. Obviously, we know that Satan can't do that. He's not going to win, but he's still going to try. He's completely arrogant on all of these things. Anyways, hopefully that makes sense to you. But what I want you to understand before we continue is the law of the Levirate marriage. When I say Levirate, it's not Levi. The word Levi is in there if you parse the word, but it's not Levi. Like, it's not Levi, like the tribe of Levi. Don't think that. Levir is what the word is, and what that actually means is a husband's brother. So Levirate, it's just a husband's brother. So my brother's over here, he ends up dying, and so now I'm your husband's brother. So if that makes sense to you. So it's important to get that, because that's going to come into play for what we're about to cover here shortly. So we're just going to start reading in chapter 3. Levirate. Yeah, there you go. What does removing the sandal do? So there's a couple different dynamics of the sandal there, Christina. But the removing of the sandal, it symbolizes two different things. In the one context that we just read in the book of Deuteronomy, it's a symbol of shame, because if you come to me and you want me to carry on my brother's name, then if I said no, then if you took my sandal, that would be shameful for me. You would spit in my face, the whole thing would be bad. But then there's another case where if you take my sandal, or if I give you my sandal, then that's almost like an agreement of sorts, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that here in a little bit. But there's two different cases. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing. But anyways, in Ruth chapter 3 verse 1, I'm going to start reading there. Ruth chapter 3 verse 1. It says, "Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, 'My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you?'" Okay, so right here, just a little bit context. Naomi was trying to look out for her daughter-in-law, Ruth. So Ruth, being young, lost her husband at a very, very early age. And so Ruth is a widow. She's still young. And Naomi's worry, you can imagine, put yourself as a mother-in-law up in age, looking at your daughter-in-law, and just imagine how you would view her. You would view her and be like, I need to do whatever I can to get you, because I want to make you happy. Like, you're looking out for me. You're doing all these things for me. I want you to find a husband to find rest, because when you read in chapter 2, the word rest is brought into play, and what that word means is marriage, because they can find rest when they have that husband. So that's what the context here is in Ruth chapter 3 verse 1. So in Ruth 3 verse 1, it says, "Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, 'My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you?'" So security, that's that rest. She's looking for marriage for her. All because of what happened, because Boaz was kind of leading in, giving some signals towards Ruth, because he was protecting her, providing for her, feeding her, all of these things that was completely unusual for the master to do to a widow. So that's what's going on. In chapter 3, verse 2. "Now Boaz, whose young woman you were with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor." Ooh, the threshing floor. Okay, so let's talk about the threshing floor, because this is we got to set the scene. So what is a threshing floor? So basically, the way that threshing floor is there's a lot of actually there's a couple times where threshing floors are mentioned in the Bible, and each time, wherever one was, something would significant would occur at these certain threshing floors. Anyways, but just so you guys can understand, I want you to picture a little bit of a hilly kind of area, and wherever this little hilly area is, there's the wind starts picking up, it starts going quicker in certain areas. So these people would find this area where the wind would be the fastest, and they would set up the threshing floor there. And so they would gather everything that they would glean from their fields, all the wheat and whatnot. And what they would end up doing whenever they set this threshing floor up, it was they would end up throwing the grain in the air during this. So whenever it was windy, they would throw whatever they had. They would throw it up into the air, and then the wind would blow, and it would take the good stuff and land it in one pile. But the lighter stuff, the stuff that didn't really matter, it would blow further away from them. So there would be end up two piles. So one pile they would throw it up into the air, and then some would land here, and then the bad stuff would land over here. So there would be two different piles. So you can use this as the sheep and the goats type of situation, right? Like they're going to divide them. So it's kind of the same concept there. So they would throw it up into the air during the wind. The wind would take it, would land some stuff in one area, it would land the other stuff in the other area. And then what the master of the fields would do, in this case Boaz, is that he would lay down near the good pile and he would protect it during the nighttime. So this is out in the field somewhere. Everything was completely different, obviously. I mean, this dude, master of the house, you think he would hire somebody to go do this, but no. The master of the house would go and he would lay down with his head right next to the pile. So his feet would be towards the servants. So his feet would be over there. Let's use I don't have my squirrel. But let's say this is his head. This is his feet. His feet would be pointed that way towards the servants. His head would be right here towards the pile, and that's how he would sleep. So the wheat and the chaff, absolutely, yeah. So he would throw it up into the air. The good stuff would land in one, the bad stuff land in the other, and that's how they would do it. But that is what the threshing floor is. So just so you have a little picture in your mind. So that is what we're getting into. So in verse 3 it says, so she's telling them that that's where he's going to be tonight. So in verse 3 it says, in chapter 3 verse 3 it says, therefore wash yourself and anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. So it's interesting because right here you can make all kinds of conversations about this is like, symbolic of what we should be doing as a Christian person, because it says we need to wash ourselves. In order, like just thinking about when you wash yourself, you don't go take a shower if you're clean, you go take your shower or you bathe if you're dirty. You need to get clean. So in order to take a bath or a shower, you first need to acknowledge that you are dirty. And so that is what you need to do to become a Christian. You need to acknowledge that you are a sinner first in order to go get clean. So you need to first, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, right? Like you need to know that you are a sinner. You need to know that you need saving before you can get saved. So it's all about that understanding, but then anointing yourself with the Holy Spirit. All of these idioms come into play, and it's really quite wonderful. You could make a message on this all in its own. But anyway, she says, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. In verse 4, it says, then it shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. Okay, so this is an interesting concept, right? Like, so first off, you're kind of being a little bit of a stalker here. So can you imagine Ruth just like peeking out behind like the sheaves and stuff, just like acting cool, like just be like, yeah, I'm not spying, you are. But no, she's going there, she's kind of scoping out Boaz, watching what he's doing, because she knows that at the end of the night he's eventually going to lay down, because that was their custom. He was going to protect his grain, his wheat, and he was going to end up passing out there. And remember, this is way back then. They didn't have lights. They're out in the middle of a field somewhere, so the only light that they had was the moon, if the moon was out, or the stars if there were stars out that night. So pitch black type of situation here. You are. So that's what's going on. So she is tracking him down. She finds where he lays. Verse 5. Chapter 3, verse 5, it says, and she said to her, all that you say to me, I will do. Okay, so verse 6, it says, so she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law instructed her. And after Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was cheerful, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, and she came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Now, There you go. Uncovering the feet. What is the uncovering the feet all about? This, it's interesting, right? Like, why are we uncovering his feet? Well, this is we're gonna just remember that, because we're gonna get to verse 9 and we're gonna unpack a lot of this stuff, but we're gonna set the scene first. So she goes, she uncovered his feet. She came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In verse 8, it says, "Now it happened at midnight that the man was startled and turned himself, and there a woman was lying at his feet." Verse 9, "And he said, 'Who are you?' So she answered, 'I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative.'" Okay, so now we're going to stay here for quite a bit of time, because this is really neat. But so you have Ruth. She goes in, sneaks in there at night. You can imagine her trying to tiptoe, like walking. Her breathing is probably like, heart pounding out of her, just hearing her heartbeat in her ears. All of these emotions you can imagine if you were living this. Like, make this real, like, because this actually happened. Put yourself in Ruth's shoes while Boaz is just like, just kind of just knocked out, passed out to the world, and here comes Ruth tiptoeing up like, "Oh, I'm gonna uncover your feet, look out." Like, that's what's going on here. And so anyways, she goes, and then at midnight he wakes up and he says, "Who are you?" Because he can't see anything. He can't see anything. It's pitch black. He's like, "Somebody's here. I don't know who it is. Who are you?" And so this is interesting, because she says, "I am Ruth." So what I want to focus on here is that if you go back in chapter 1 and 2, every time it's Ruth, I think, don't quote me on that, I think, but like, I haven't counted it. But whenever Ruth is being introduced or something along those lines similar to that, it's always Ruth the Moabitess, right? Like, it's always Ruth the Moabitess. Like, "I am Ruth the Moabitess." That's how it happens. But here she says, "I am Ruth." There's no Moabitess. She doesn't say, "I am Ruth the Moabitess." She doesn't identify herself to be that, but that is how everybody knew her to be during this time, because she is a pagan, right? Like, she is a Gentile. Remember that. She's a Gentile. She is not a Jew. She is a Gentile. And so she says, "I am Ruth, your maidservant." So interesting. The word maidservant, first off, in chapter 3, verse 3, let's go back to chapter 3, verse 3. It says, "Therefore wash yourself and anoint yourself, put on your best garment." What is interesting, yeah, Shelba. What is interesting, yeah, kicking me right in the face. Story ends. But what's interesting in chapter 3, verse 3, is that Naomi tells her to put on your best garment. And so the way it's kind of viewed at this time is that, remember, Naomi and Ruth are widows. They wore certain clothing so that people knew that they were widows. Like, they had certain garb that they had on. Okay? And so here, now Naomi is telling her to wear her best garment. So now Ruth shows up in different clothes than what they've all seen her wear before. So she was wearing this same stuff all this time, letting everybody know she's a widow, mourning, whatever. And then all of a sudden, she's wearing her best garments. So she shows up, and that's what she's wearing, her best garments. And the word maidservant here in chapter 3, verse 9, where it says, "And he said, 'Who are you?' So she answered, 'I am Ruth, your maidservant.'" The word maidservant is different than when you go to chapter 2, verse 13. So go to chapter 2, verse 13. It says this, "Then she said, 'Let me find favor in your sight, my lord, for you have comforted me and have spoken kindly to your maidservant.'" So the maidservant in chapter 2, verse 13 is a different meaning. It's a different maidservant than the one in chapter 3, verse 9. The one in chapter 3, verse 9 gives the idea that she is now eligible to be married. And that's really neat. So words have meaning. Words are powerful. This is cool stuff. So what she's doing here, the whole picture, is that she's wearing different clothing than what she was before. She's wearing her best garments than what she was before. Before, everything was different. But now things have changed. Now she's ready to move on, clearly. And so she shows up and she says, "I am Ruth, your maidservant." But then it says, take, in chapter 3, verse 9, it says, I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing. So let's talk about wing for a second. Wing. What is that? I don't know what Bible you're wearing, or you're wearing. I guess you could be. And I don't know what Bible you're using, but this wing is emblematic of a garment. Mine says wing, but if you click on it, it could say skirt or it could say garment. But this is take your maidservant under your garment. So let's unpack that for a second, because the garment. Let's talk about the garment. So there's a lot of interesting conversations and important lessons within the garment world. But the first thing that is pretty interesting to understand is like how things were back during the ancient days, like back when they were alive, right? Like Ruth and Boaz. So if you saw a soldier right now, or a law enforcement, whatever, you would see that they would have their rank on their shoulder, right? Like that's where you see it. It would be on their shoulder, or depending on their uniform, it might be up here on their collar. So that's how we identify authority, right? So, but back then, it was on the hem of their garment, which went all the way down to the floor. And so that's important to understand for this time. Remember, this is geared towards the Jewish people. This is a Jewish book right now that we are diving into. Although there's the picture of the church here too, but it's important to understand the context. So the hem of the garment, which was at the bottom of the skirt that everybody wore, their authority was at the bottom of their garment, at the hem, all the way down at the bottom by their feet. And so that's important to understand. And it's also good to know that a husband could divorce his wife by cutting the hem of her robe. So the hem had the authority of a man. A man could cut the hem of the woman's garment as a sign of divorce. But also noblemen back then could also authenticate certain things, because back when they used clay to write things down, they could take their garment, like let's say this is my garment and this is a clay tablet. I could take my garment and push it into the clay, and then the embroidery would be shown on, and my embroidery would match this, so that way it was like a kind of a sign of sealing, stuff like that. What's up, Lone Wolf? Good to see you, man. But that's the importance of the hem, the garments. There's a lot of meaning that went behind this type of stuff. So that is important to understand. But let's go ahead and just unpack some of these real fast. Go to 1 Samuel chapter 24. 1 Samuel chapter 24. I'm just going to read a couple of this, starting at verse 1. 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 1. It says, Now it happened when Saul had returned from following the Philistines, that it was told him, saying, Take note, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. En-gedi means fountain of the kid. Fountain of the kid, K-I-D. Verse 2, Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats. So he came to the sheepfolds by the road where there was a cave, and Saul went in to attend his needs. David and his men were staying in the recesses of the caves. Then the men of David said to him, This is the day which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you. And David arose and secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, saying, He is the anointed of the Lord. So David restrained his servants with these words and did not allow them to rise against Saul. And Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. David also arose afterward, went out of the cave, and called out to Saul, saying, My lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed down. And David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Indeed, David seeks your harm? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave, and someone urged me to kill you, but my eye spared you. And I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see, yes, the corner of your robe in my hand. For in that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you. Know and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my hand, and I have not sinned against you, yet you hunt my life to take it. So right there's just one example of how the importance of the hem comes into play. Like, he just went up and he cut it. That was the authority. That's where the authority went. But let's unpack it a little bit more. Let's go to Numbers 15, verse 38. Numbers 15, verse 38 and 39. Because it's really interesting. Numbers 15, 38 and 39. Numbers 15, 38 and 39 says this: Speak to the children of Israel, tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue thread in the tassels of the corners. And you shall have the tassel, that you may look upon it, and remember all the commandments of the Lord, and do them, and that you may not follow the harlotry to which your own heart and your own eyes are inclined. So they also have that kind of stuff going on that's geared towards the Jewish people. So if you ever wonder why those people wear those types of things, there's your answer. That's what they do. That's why they do it for. But Ezekiel 16, let's go to Ezekiel 16, verse 8. Ezekiel 16, verse 8. Ezekiel 16, verse 8 says, When I passed by you again and looked upon you, indeed your time was the time of love. So I spread my wing over you and covered your nakedness. Yes, I swore an oath to you and entered into a covenant with you, and you became mine, says the Lord God. So right here, this wing, that wing is the same wing, that's the same word that's used in Ruth 3, verse 9. The wing. So the wing represents protection here, and this is just another example of that. So that wing, skirt, garment, all equals protection. But let's go to, because this is really, really interesting, let's go to Matthew 14, verse 36. Matthew 14, verse 36. In Matthew 14, verse 36, it says this: And begged him that they might only touch. Well, let's get the context here. In Matthew 14, Matthew 14, verse 34, it says, When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret, and when the men of the place recognized him, they sent out into all that surrounding region, brought to him all who were sick, and begged him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched it were made perfectly well. The hem is there's power and authority in Jesus's garments. Obviously, it's not his clothes that have the power. It's all about who he is. It's not about his clothes. That's why it's interesting that these people are like, "What do you think about the shroud?" And they're like, "No, it has, that's not. You're missing the point." But let's go to Mark 6, 56 for another example. Mark 6, verse 56. In Mark 6, verse 56, it says, Whenever he entered into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well. So there's another one. Luke 8:44. Luke 8:44. It says this in Luke 8:43 and 44. Now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all of her livelihood on physicians and could not be healed by any, came from behind and touched the border of his garment. and immediately her flow of blood stopped. The border of his garment, the hem of his garment, is where the authority is displayed. And this is another example. But also, what's really interesting about this is that in Luke 8:43, it says this woman had a flow of blood for 12 years. So if you go to, I want to like, you guys remember Jairus, his daughter, his daughter died, and he asked Jesus to heal her daughter. She was 12 years old, so it's just an interesting connection that woman had a flow of blood for 12 years, and then that little girl, she was 12 years old. I think it's important to pay attention to those little details because, as we talked about before, there's nothing given to us here on accident. Like, it's like whenever they say "and it was night," like that's not just filler words. Like, these are important things to pay attention to. But that is important to understand. But let's do one more. Matthew 9 verse 20. Matthew 9 verse 20, and then we'll get back to Ruth. Matthew 9 verse 20. It says this: "And suddenly a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years, there's a 12 years, came from behind and touched the hem of his garment. For she said to herself, if only I may touch his garment, I should be made well." So you have the same, you have those synoptics. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, those are synoptics, same optics, type of perspectives there. But that's what's going on here. So let's go back to Ruth 3 verse 9 and read it again with that in mind. So just as a way of review real fast, you have this threshing floor where it's out in the middle of nowhere, out in the fields, and they throw the grain up in the air, and the wind takes the good stuff, puts it in one pile, and it removes the chaff and puts it in the other pile. And so then the sun goes down. Boaz lays down with his head at the pile of the good stuff, his feet going away towards the rest of his servants that were also out in the other field or in the field. And then Ruth sneaks in. He wakes up and he says, "Who are you?" She answered, "I am Ruth, your maidservant." Maidservant, remember, she's wearing this new clothing. And she says, "Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative." This is a type of way that she is approaching him for him to fulfill this Levirate marriage. Remember the agreement there that we covered already. Because a Levirate marriage is a husband's brother. Because remember, Elimelech and Boaz were related. Okay, so if you remember in chapter 1, Elimelech, he gone, he dead. And so now Naomi is related to Boaz only through Elimelech. So now this law applies. So now Naomi or Ruth can go up to Boaz and say, "Hey, you have a duty, and I am asking you to fulfill it." So that is what is going on. So she goes up and she's initiating this sequence of events that he knows, and he knows the situation. So that's what's going on, and it's really, really cool. But she's presenting herself in these kind of clothes. She cleaned herself up. She's not wearing what she wore before, and that is what is going on here. So that is why I gave you all that, the law of Levirate marriage that we talked about before. But remember, he has to be a near kinsman. He has to be able to fulfill everything, and he has to be willing to do it, because he can say no. So that's important to remember. So then we're going to move on in verse 10. In verse 10, chapter 3, verse 10, it says, "Then he said, Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, and that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich." So when he says, "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter," I mean, this guy, it's implied that he's older. Like, he's up in the age, and she is younger. Like, I mean, I don't know, let's say 21, and you got like some dude that's like 55 or something like that. I don't know the age difference, but that's what the verbiage kind of implies in a sense. But in verse 11, it says this: "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request. For all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman." That is interesting. Remember, let's talk about this, because we talked about how Ruth is emblematic of the church, right? And how are you and I, as the church, the bride, supposed to present ourselves to Christ? We are supposed to be a chaste virgin. But where Boaz specifically calls Ruth a virtuous woman, he's like, everybody knows you're a virtuous woman. So that's pretty neat. Let's go to Proverbs 31, which I'm sure you guys might be familiar with, but just in case you aren't, go to Proverbs 31. This is what we should um, be looking for or be striving to be. But Proverbs 31, verse 10 says, "Who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is a law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates." That is what Boaz just called Ruth. I mean, crazy. That's wild. And that's a picture of the church. Like, it's so... all right. So anyways, going back to Ruth 3, verse 12 now, moving on. It says this. Now, Boaz is speaking here. Boaz says, 3 verse 12, it says, "Now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a relative closer than I." Ooh. Now we got a plot that's thickening. So Boaz wants to do this, but there's somebody closer. So now there's this obstacle. Verse 13, "Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good. Let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you, as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning." As the Lord lives, like, he's giving an oath in a sense by saying, "As the Lord lives." Like, he's saying, this gonna happen. I'm gonna figure this out. He says, "Lie down until morning." They were not doing any hanky panky kind of stuff. Like, he was just telling her to lie down, telling her to rest. Remember, rest was brought in like Naomi wanted Ruth to find rest. It's a play on words in a sense too. It's really neat. But in verse 14 it says, "So she lay at his feet until morning, and she arose before one could recognize another. Then he said, 'Do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor.' Also he said, 'Bring the shawl that is on you and hold it.' And when she held it, he measured 6 ephahs of barley and laid it on her. Then she went into the city." So this is so where it says 6 measurements of barley. This is gonna kind of resound with Naomi. We'll pick that up in verse 18. But in verse 16, it says, "When she came to her mother-in-law, she said, 'Is that you, my daughter?' Then she told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, 'These 6 ephahs of barley he gave me, for he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law.' Then she said, "Sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out, for the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter to this day." Now, it's interesting. Um, I don't think so, Leah, but if you got to go, that's okay. But it's interesting that like there are six of them, right? So he gives six of these measurements of barley to Ruth, and then Ruth gives that to Naomi, and then all of a sudden Naomi's like, "Just go ahead and sit still, Ruth. He's not going to rest." It's like there was like a little hidden acknowledgement between Boaz and Naomi, because right when Ruth gave it to Naomi, she told her to sit down and wait and relax because he's not going to rest. And people theorize that the reason why Boaz gave her six ephahs of barley, that it's because of that's how many days, 6 days, and then on the seventh he rested, right? So meaning if you would have given seventh, it wouldn't have applied because you rest on the seventh day. But here there was six, which means he was still working, and then the seventh day he will rest. So it's an interesting communication inner workings there. Some people theorize. Take it for how you will, but that's what's going on here in chapter 3, and we're just going to move on in chapter 4 and kind of finish this book. But that is what is going on in this chapter 3, which is pretty stinking neat. I mean, there's so much cool stuff here, and the picture is going to be complete here once we finish this. So hopefully you can see it. But that's chapter 3. So just a way of recap, just so you guys can maintain perspective of this whole picture here. In chapter 1, Elimelech and Naomi lived in Bethlehem, but then they sold their stuff to move to Moab. So then they moved back to Bethlehem, and they don't have anything anymore because they got rid of it. Like, they're back in their land, but they don't have what they used to have. And so after they both become widows, they realize that Boaz is a kinsman. We already talked about what the law of levirate marriage was, and that was basically where the woman could go up to the man. It had to be the woman going up to the man to initiate it and say, "Hey, you're a close relative. We got to save this inheritance. We got to keep this land in the promised land. So I mean, we can't not have this go to anybody else. Will you help me out here?" So that's what Ruth ends up doing to Boaz. So it's a two-pronged type of situation that Boaz is finding himself in here, because he's not only trying to take a bride, but he's also trying to get the land back for Naomi. So there's two things going on. So he's getting a bride and he's trying to get the land. So it's not just the bride, but it's a bride and land. So remember that. But let's go to, before we go into chapter 4, let's go to Leviticus 25 real fast, because we got to understand this too. This is good to know. Leviticus 25. Okay, Leviticus 25. We'll start reading in Leviticus 25, verse 23. It says this in verse 23. "The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine." Remember that. It's like this land, it was given to Joshua when Joshua goes into the land of Canaan. Canaan is the promised land. It was divided among the 12 tribes. They could sell it if they wanted to, but it was never like sold for good. It was never sold permanently. It was more of a lease type of situation where, hey, you now have control of the land for a time, but in 50 years, I'm going to get it back, because that's when the year of Jubilee occurs and the land goes back to its owners. That's how they kept the land to the people, to the tribes. Anyways, in Leviticus 25, verse 23, it says, "The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me, and in all the land of your possession you shall grant redemption of the land." So this is where we are learning about the redemption of the land. Okay, so that's what this is important to understand for when we continue on. But in verse 25 it says, "If one of your brethren becomes poor and has sold some of his possessions, and if his redeeming relative comes to redeem it, then he may redeem what his brother sold." Does that ring a bell? This is what is going on in the book of Ruth. Elimelech sold his land, and now we're learning about how he can get it back. We're going to read that again. Leviticus 25, verse 25. It says, if one of your brethren becomes poor and has sold some of his possessions, and if his redeeming relative comes to redeem it, then he may redeem it, or redeem what his brother sold. So that's the player. Remember, Elimelech got rid of his stuff, and now Boaz is going to come on scene to try to get all of this stuff back. But moving on in verse 26, or if the man has no one to redeem it, but he himself becomes able to redeem it, then let him count the years since its sale and restore the remainder to the man to whom he sold it, that he may return to his possession. But if he is not able to have it restored to himself, then what was sold shall remain in the hand of him who bought it until the year of Jubilee. And in the Jubilee it shall be released, and he shall return to his possession. So, and then if you're interested, you can read Leviticus 25, verse 47 through 55. That's good to kind of understand the law of redemption as well. This kind of stuff. Okay, Leah, take your time. But that's in Leviticus 25, verse 47 through 55. You can get a good idea of what's going on here. But basically, it's important to understand that Israel belongs to God here. That's never changed. But when Joshua entered the land, it was granted to the 12 tribes that the land was able to stay, or it was supposed to stay with the tribe, and then you could basically sell your land. But it was more of a lease, like we talked about before. You could sell the rights to the land. So the land would be given over to somebody else, and they would be able to rule it how they wanted to. But remember, whenever this occurred, there would be a title deed that they would give to one another. And so on the inside of the scroll, they would be the information about the land and whatnot. But then on the back of the scroll was what needed to be completed if the person wanted to come back to get their land back. I hope that makes sense. So if I sell you my car, here's the title. Here's all the information on the car on this page. But on the back side, here's all the information that I need to do in order to get my car back. On this side, it's all about the car. On this side, it's how I get my car back. If hopefully that makes sense to you guys, because that's important to understand for what we're going to go through in chapter 4. And that's also going to be really important to understand when we get to Revelation chapter 5. But anyways, in Revelation chapter 4, I'm just going to start reading in verse 1. It says, now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So, real fast, where it says, in verse 1, where it says, now Boaz went up to the gate, that gate is mentioned time and time again all throughout this Old Testament. The gate, the gate, the gate, the gate. You can look at this gate as like a city council type of area, but it's where many transactions and business dealings took place. So that's the scene. Like, this is no coincidence here. But pay attention to the vibe, because this is very interesting. So I'll read it again. Verse 1. Chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, come aside, friend. Sit down here. So he came aside and sat down. I find it interesting, because if you remember what we talked about before about Boaz, like what his name in him is strength, like you get the idea that he was a warrior, he was a man of valor, he was very wise, all of these kind of characteristics that go along with him. Boaz seems to be very prominent in this world back then. Now, obviously, he had fields and all of this stuff, but here he just says, hey, come here, sit down, and the guy does it. He's like, okay. So that's what's going on. So the closer relative comes and sits down here. So then we get to verse 2, chapter 4, verse 2, and it says, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. again, it seems like Boaz is in charge here. Yeah, Deborah, kinsman redeemer, absolutely. The Goel, mine has it listed as a redeemer. Well, I don't know what you're reading from, so I can't really elaborate on that. But I'm reading out the New King James. But it says in chapter 2, it says, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. So you have a sense of authority about Boaz. So keep that in mind. But in verse 3, it says, then he said to the close relative, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So right away in this verse, you're seeing that the land that we just talked about in Leviticus 25, that the whole thing that we just read, the land needs redeemed. And so that's why Boaz is going up to the closer relative. And he's like, hey, he brings up his brother Elimelech and he brings up the land. So the land needs redeemed. But in verse 4, it says, and I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me that I may know. For there is no one but you to redeem it. And I am next after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. Okay, so here you see it again. Ruth the Moabitess. Now, it's interesting because Boaz, he understands how the Moabitess comes into play. And if you were here during chapters 1 and 2, you understand that the people of Moabite, that's when Balak, the whole, he hired Balaam to curse the children of Israel, but he couldn't do it. So he said, hey, king, send in all of your women in there to seduce the men of Israel, and they will fall into temptation, and then God will curse them, because I can't curse them, but God can if you get them to sin. So anyways, the king sent all of his women in there, and sure enough, they fell into all kinds of sexual immorality, but that was the people of Moab. So what you understand when you do some digging is that these women had to have been very beautiful, because right away when Boaz sees Ruth, he's caught off guard. He's like, what? Who is that? What's your number? What's your digits? But anyways, so now Boaz is speaking on Ruth's behalf. He goes to this closer kinsman, and he's like, if you do it, you're also going to have to pick up Ruth the Moabitess. He introduces her to him by saying the Moabitess, almost as a sense of oh, she's a Moabitess. Can you believe it? Almost trying to talk him out of it by making it seem like it's not that big of a deal. So this guy hears Moabitess, and he's like, wait a second. And also, we'll continue on. So, buy it from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. Verse 6, and the close relatives said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Because if he would have done this, then his inheritance would have been lost. So he can't do it because of that situation alone. And so that's interesting. So Boaz is being tactful about his approach here. And he basically is like, okay. So he gathers all of the elders. He has all the people there in the gate, or the city council here, if you will. And this is where all the business transactions kind of happened back in their time. And so now everybody is hearing this conversation going on between the two. And the closer relative is like, I can't do it. You do it. And so now Boaz is like, Yahtzee. And so here we go into verse 7. It says, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was a confirmation in Israel. Okay, so what we talked about before in the book of Deuteronomy, where the woman, if the guy refused to do this stuff for the woman, that the woman would go and remove the man's sandal and then take it from him and then just spit in his face. I just can't. just like laying it on thick. I mean, she had to muster up like this. Anyways, but this situation where the sandal is being handed over by the man to another man is a business transaction. Yeah, no. And so that is what's going on here. So you have two different sandals. One is a bad way, one is very shameful, but the one that we're reading about here is a confirmation of a deal, like a transaction, like it's almost a form of receipt, like, hey, here you go, it's all yours. That's what's going on here. Because, and then when you think about the shoes, like with Moses when he was standing by the fire, the burning bush, Moses took off his shoes and he was standing on holy ground. Joshua did the same thing. He took off his sandals. He was standing on holy ground. The way that they would do things here is they would remove their shoes and then they would walk on their ground as a way of like they would mark it with their bare feet. So that's like an idea of what was going on here. But this guy gives his sandal to Boaz, and from the closer kinsman to Boaz, it was like a way of getting rid of something. But to Boaz, it was a green light to go ahead and marry Ruth and get the land back for Naomi. And that is really, really neat. And so I'm going to give you guys another type here, if you will. So remember, we're just going to start from the beginning. Boaz is a type of Christ. He's a type of Jesus Christ. Ruth is a type of the church. Naomi is a type of Israel. The unnamed servant in chapter 2 is a type of the Holy Spirit. But now we're going to get to another type here. And I just, you can take this how you will, but I think it's interesting, and I figured I would at least say it because it's out there. And I actually do find it rather neat because of the picture that it's going to paint at the very end. But let's go to Ruth chapter 4, verse 6. It says, and the close relative, that's what, we don't get a name. We don't know who this guy is. We just know he's a closer relative. So he's a close relative. So it says, and the close relative said, okay, so this close relative can be used or can be viewed as a type of the Mosaic law. And that's interesting because we're going to see that come into play at the very end. So just keep that in your mind, because the picture that it paints, when you put it all together and you say it out loud, you're just like, wait a second, what? So if I don't remember it, remind me, but we'll get back to that because I think the picture is pretty neat. But we'll continue on in Ruth. So in Ruth chapter 4, verse 8, it says, therefore the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. So he took off his sandal. Verse 9, and Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mathlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Machlon, I have acquired as my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. My Bible says in verse 10, I have acquired as my wife. King James will say, I have purchased. But anyways, I need you to understand that Boaz is saying, I have purchased as my wife. He says, I have purchased Ruth as my wife. So I need you to understand this is a whole transaction situation going on here. And the picture at the end of all of this is so cool. But he essentially purchased Ruth, which is weird to think of. But my question to you, with Boaz being a type of Jesus and Ruth being a type of the church, did Jesus purchase the church? And if he did, what did he purchase it with? Because he purchased us with his blood, and it's really it's so neat. His blood, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to continue reading here. But what just happened in chapter 4, verse 10? In verse 10, there was a double redemption. Yeah, absolutely. His blood, his life. Yeah. But in chapter 4, verse 10, there was a double redemption that just took place in chapter 4, verse 10. He redeemed Ruth. Redeem is another word of saying purchased. So he purchased Ruth, but he also got back the land for Naomi. So there is a double redemption going on right here. So in verse 11, it says this, and all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord made the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel, and may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. So we talked about Bethlehem earlier because Bethlehem and Micah 5:2, like whenever the Christmas cards go out to everybody, they're like, oh, Micah 5:2, right? Like the city of David. Remember what we talked about before. The reason why Bethlehem is referred to as the city of David, it all comes here. It starts here. Now, mind you, David is not yet born, but here we are. We see David's great grandparents in Bethlehem, and then we're going to see the genealogy at the end of this. But the David's going to come back, and like that's why it's referred to as the city of David. So that's why it's made famous, because of the book of Ruth. But in verse 12, this verse 12 is very interesting, and this is like, oh, great. In verse 12, it says, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. Okay, so this is really interesting. So let's go to Genesis chapter 38 real fast, because just so you guys can understand why that's in here. Genesis 38. And we're not going to dive too deep in here, but I'm going to read this chapter just so you guys can understand it, because it's really quite interesting. But in Genesis chapter 38, starting at verse 6, Genesis 38, verse 6, it says, then Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. And Judah said to Anan, go into your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother. So this is a type of the Levirate marriage that we witness in the book of Ruth, because the brother died, and now the next brother in line is being like instructed to go to the woman who is a widow. But verse 9, it says, but Anan knew that the heir would not be his. And it came to pass when he went into his brother's wife that he admitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. What? Verse 10. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also. Okay, so God is just knocking these dudes out one by one. And that is, I mean, different time back then. Then we get to verse 11. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. For he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So there's the picture here is Tamar is just hanging out, waiting for this young boy to become a man so that they can marry one another, because he's a child at this time. So in verse 12, it says, now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up to the sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hirah and the Adulamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garments, kind of remind you of Ruth a little bit, how she had those garments on as well. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. So what's going on here is that this woman waited and waited for this guy named Shelah to grow up. He finally grows up, and he was never given to her as a husband. So she's been waiting for a husband this entire time. So what she ends up doing now is she ends up dressing up like a harlot. So in verse 15, it says, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot because of how she was dressed, because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her, by the way, and said, please let me come into you. That was some straight up rizzle dizzle that this dude was slaying. Like, he was just throwing out, he's like, hey girl, like, what? But anyways, he says, what? Can you imagine? How art thou? Let me come into, like, anyways, I just can't. So he says, please let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, what will you give me that you may come into me? And he said, I will send a young goat from the flock. So she said, will you give me a pledge till you send it? Then he said, what pledge shall I give you? So she said, your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand. Then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adulamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, where is that harlot who was openly by the roadside? And they said, there was no harlot in this place. So he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Also the men of this place said, there was no harlot in this place. Then Judah said, let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed. For I sent this young goat, and you have not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar your daughter-in-law has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. So this guy is super, apparently, thinking that he's the only person who's never messed up in his life, forgetting what he's done, and he's calling her out. Said, bring her out and let her be burned. Verse 25, when she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, please determine whose these are. And then she shows the signet and the cord and staff, which was given to her by Judah himself. And then verse 26, it says, so Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah my son. And he never knew her again. So he acknowledged that what he did was wrong. He promised her one thing, never came through with that promise. And so he's like, you know what? I messed up. This is my fault. But in verse 27, it says, now it came to pass at the time for giving birth that, behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was when she was giving birth that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Then it happened, as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly. And she said, how did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So Perez, that name means breach, because he breached. But so that's the whole. So let's go. So that's what's going on there. But let's go back to Ruth now, because Ruth chapter 4 verse 12. In Ruth chapter 4 verse 12, it says, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. Okay. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So Perez is the offspring of Tamar from Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. So if you go, that is the backstory of Perez and Tamar and Judah. It's an interesting verse that it's quite interesting. There's more to it, and I can't really. I'm gonna try to stay away from it just because I don't think I can articulate it as well. I understand it myself, but I can't really verbalize it right now. So, sorry about that. But anyways, moving on to verse 13. There's more to it. Obviously, there's more to everything. You could elaborate on so many other things. I could just. But in verse 13, we'll move on. In verse 13, it says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son." So first off, I think this is really important to understand. Okay, so Boaz's mother. Remember who Boaz's mother is, right? Boaz's mother is Rahab. Rahab was the harlot from Joshua. Remember Jericho? When they marched around Jericho, Joshua sent two spies in, and Rahab ended up hiding those two spies and ended up saving their lives and whatnot, and then they ended up saving hers in return. Well, Rahab ended up becoming the mother of Boaz. And so it's important to understand that Rahab was not a Jew. Rahab was a Gentile. But Rahab ends up getting saved. She comes to the Jewish side, ends up getting married to a Jew, and then or Rahab and her husband, which is mentioned down at the bottom of this chapter, his name is Salmon, they end up having Boaz. And so Boaz is born a Jew, but his wife was a Gentile. Or I'm sorry, his mother was a Gentile. So keep that in mind. So Boaz grew up having a father as a Jew, but his mother was a Gentile. So that's an interesting dynamic there. So it's not like abnormal for Boaz to take Ruth as a bride because his mother was a Gentile. So by him taking Ruth, which was against the law, like a Moabitess, like you can't do that kind of thing. There's certain situations where it could be done, and this was one of them. And so that's what's really neat. Like he redeemed the land, he redeemed Ruth, and it wasn't that far out of the picture for Boaz because that's where he came from. Like he knew, he's like, I know that. He's like, I exactly know how you feel. I understand my mother. Like you can imagine how his mind thought. Like he could relate to Ruth, and so he sees her in a different lens than how a Jew, like a full bred type of Jew would actually see things. But he didn't come from that kind of line, so he saw Ruth differently. So I think that's pretty neat. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And I think it's interesting that it says became his wife, because at the end of the story, Ruth becomes his wife. If you compare Ruth to the book of Revelation, the church becomes his wife at the end of the story too. And I just like, that's us. Like, that's super neat. So then you get to... in verse 13 it says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, 'Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him.' Then Naomi took the child, which is Boaz and Ruth's child, and laid him on her bosom, and became a nurse to him." So Ruth's son is going to be David's grandfather. But we're going to get into the genealogy here, and then we're going to just unpack everything from there so that we can understand it better. But in verse 17 it says, "Also the neighbor women gave him a name, saying that there is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Amminadab. And then Aminadab begot Nahshon, and Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. So you have this whole underlying of the things that are going to come. And if you know the Bible in a roundabout way, you understand the things that are about to take place here in the following books. But this is all about the laying the groundwork for David. And it's really interesting, because when you get into the book of Samuel, like you'll find that King Saul is the first king that was anointed of Israel. But King Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin, which, if you know anything about how the tribes work, that's wrong. That should not happen, because all the kings come from what tribe? All the kings come from the tribe of Judah, right? So why did King Saul come from the tribe of Benjamin? So it's interesting. It's interesting to unpack that kind of thing. But anyways, so we are going to unpack this, and I'm going to try and give you guys this picture, because the picture is really quite cool. Okay, so remember, you have Boaz. He's a type of Jesus. He's a type of Christ. You have Naomi. She is a type of Israel. You have Ruth. She is a type of the church. You have the unnamed servant. He is a type of the Holy Spirit. And then you have the closer relative, or the closer kinsman, who is a type of the Mosaic law. And so here's how to see it. Okay, so remember, Ruth went to Boaz. And I want you to see the picture here. Ruth went to Boaz. Let's unpack that for a second, because it doesn't matter how much Boaz loved Ruth, right? Because remember, Jesus is Boaz, or Boaz is a type of Jesus. Ruth is a type of the church. It doesn't matter how much Jesus loves us if we don't go to him. Do you see? So Ruth went to Boaz. She had to initiate it, even though he was going to take care of everything. She had to go to him. That we have to go to Jesus. That's the picture there. The nearest kinsman was not enough. Remember, the closest relative is a type of the Mosaic law. So the Mosaic law, or the nearest kinsman, was not enough. It couldn't do it. Like, remember, in the Old Testament, they were under the law. The law was given so that they knew that they could never be good enough. Like, that's what they were doing. And then in the New Testament, everything changed after Jesus died on the cross. But the nearest kinsman, if you look at it from a type of Mosaic law, he wasn't enough. He couldn't do it. And so that's why I think that's interesting. But Ruth doesn't replace Naomi. That's very important to understand too, because a lot of people think that the church replaced Israel, meaning Israel is no longer prominent. They're no longer important. They don't play a role anymore. They think that the church is now, we've taken over. Completely incorrect. So understand that, because they are still two different entities in this story, and so the types wouldn't fit. Like, it's all about the picture. But Ruth does not replace Naomi. But I also think that it's cool that Naomi meets Boaz through Ruth. Do you see that? Naomi meets Boaz through Ruth, which means, now I'm going to say it in the typology type of way, Israel meets Jesus through the church. Isn't that cool? Israel meets Jesus through the church. And then this is really neat. After Ruth came to Boaz, it should have been Ruth who went up to the nearest kinsman. It should have been her who went to the nearest kinsman and tried to talk her way out of marrying that guy, because she wanted to marry Boaz. It should have been the woman to go do those things, but Boaz said, I'm going to handle it. So the picture there, Jesus intercedes for us. Like, when we go to him, he handles it from there. He intercedes for us. So let's go to Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25 real fast. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25. It says this, therefore he is also able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. So he intercedes for us. He is our advocate. And that's really cool because Ruth went to Boaz, and then Boaz said, I'll take care of it. You and I go to Jesus, and then Jesus says, I'll take care of it. And so instead of us going up to the closer kinsman who didn't want us, Jesus did that for her. Boaz did that for her. I hope you guys are understanding this. I don't know if you guys are seeing the picture, but the picture all around is just unbelievable. It's a picture of love. It's a picture of redemption. Boaz ended up purchasing Ruth. Jesus ended up purchasing you and I. He ended up getting the land back for Naomi so that they could keep their inheritance. I mean, the entire overview of it, it's just, I mean, it is just very, very cool. The hem, she uncovers his feet, then covers her, like, spread your wings, like, that was a Levirate marriage, like, I mean, and it's interesting that all this was thrown into motion centuries before Jesus was even born. And it's so cool because when you look at everything in the Old Testament, it all is this is all going all throughout the Old Testament. It's all pointing towards Jesus. And it's fascinating. You know, we went through the book of Daniel and we went through the book of Revelation, but it's all about Jesus. Never about anything else. But speaking of Revelation, I forgot to bring it back to Revelation chapter 5. So let's cover that real quick. So go to Revelation chapter 5. So in Revelation chapter 5, verse 1, so just so if you weren't here for our study of the book of Revelation, Revelation chapter 5, verse 1, John is having this vision. He's taken up. He's in the throne room of Christ. And here he is seeing all of these visions on things that are going to come into the future, right? So in Revelation chapter 5, verse 1, it says this, and I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. So I hope you guys are understanding that picture already, because now you have a scroll. Remember the redemption of the land situation. If you want to sell the land, I would give you the title deed. Here would be all the information about the land, but then on the back is all the information on what I would need to do in order to get the land back if I personally wanted to buy it back from you. So in Revelation chapter 5, again, I'm going to read it because this is the title deed to the earth. This is what the scroll represents. In chapter 5, verse 1 of Revelation, it says, and I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. Then I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals? Verse 3, and no one in heaven or on the earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look at it. So in verse 3 it says, in my Bible it says, and no one, but in the King James it says, and no man. And no man in heaven or on earth. Now that's important. I need you to understand that. So keep that in mind. In verse 3 it says, and no man. So moving on to verse 4, Revelation chapter 5, verse 4. It says, so I wept much because no man was found worthy to open and read the scroll or to look at it. Remember, like, this is talking like, okay, we'll just continue. But that's what John, he's saying. So John is weeping. He's sobbing uncontrollably because there is no man worthy to take that scroll. But in verse 5, one of the elders said to me, do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and to loose its 7 seals. And I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne, and of the four living creatures, and in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb as though it had been slain. Now it's interesting because just in the verse prior to that, the elder says, don't worry, behold, the lion of the tribe of Judah. So it's almost like when John turns around, he's expecting to see a lion. But in verse 6, he says, I see a lamb. It's interesting. So he sees a lamb as though it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. Then he came and took the scroll out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. So the picture here is God the Son walks up to God the Father, and he takes that scroll. That is the title deed to the earth, because in the beginning, when there was Adam and Eve, Adam essentially had the title deed to the earth, but then he forfeited it when sin entered the world. And so the title of the earth, the title deed to the earth was forfeited. So then God the Son had to become a man. He had to localize himself as a man, live a sinless life, get crucified willingly, and he purchased you and I. But let's talk about the Goel, the kinsman redeemer. Let's talk about that, because remember what we talked about in the book of Leviticus, right? The Levirate marriage, the law of Levirate marriage. It says there's things that you have to be. You have to be a kinsman. You have to be a kinsman in order to do this. You can't just be somebody off the street and be like, oh, I'll do it. No, you have to be a kinsman. Jesus became a man. He checks that off the list. He has to be able to do it. He was able. And then he had to be willing. And he was. Jesus, Boaz was willing. Boaz was able. Boaz was a kinsman. He was a type of Jesus. I hope you see this picture here of everything that's going on, because in order to understand Revelation chapter 5, you kind of need to understand Ruth and Boaz, because it's a type. And the type foreshadows all of these things that come to be in the future, centuries into the future. And it's I mean, centuries before Jesus was even born. I mean, unbelievable. But anyways, Revelation chapter 5, if you were here for a study, you know that these guys are introduced in chapter 5 as the 24 elders, and you need to do a study on that if you don't understand who they are, because they are the church, because they identify themselves to be kings and priests. And kings and priests there's only 3 people who are kings and priests. You have Melchizedek, you have Jesus Christ, and then you have the church, who is referred to as the royal priesthood in 1 Peter chapter 2. But that's the kind of stuff that you need to understand, so that you can understand why I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. But that is the story of Ruth, and it's really, really neat. So hopefully that was enjoyable for you guys, but I love it. No kidding, right? Never heard someone connect Boaz and Jesus, but that's so true. Both were worthy. Yeah, Naomi. Hey, Naomi, your name means pleasant. Thanks, Holly. Yeah, on this Saturday, absolutely, Amber. Thanks, Coffee Queen, Coffee Girl, Thank you, I appreciate that. Figured you guys need to go to bed early because you guys got church in the morning. Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Yeah, I always tell people that you can only give me a gift if you told somebody about Jesus, because I'm not here for the gifts, but I appreciate you guys. Thank you, guys. Hopefully all of this means that you guys told somebody about Jesus, because that's all I want. Yes, sir, and my sister's middle name is Ruth. No kidding, that's awesome. Moses, Ezekiel, Elijah. Good job tonight, Ryan. Thanks, Wire, man. I appreciate that. Thanks, Laura. Good stuff. Thank you. Thanks, Laura. Gosh. Yeah, forgiven. Absolutely. Um, Thanks, Deborah, for inviting to the live. God bless you all. Thanks for being here, Lord J. Thanks. Iron sharpens iron, and I feel sharp. And let's go, Savannah. That's actually funny because that was the name of my Discord. I've been working on a Discord, just trying to get one up and running so everybody could hop in it and just have communication together. I think that would be kind of fun. But I named it Sharpening Iron is what I was going with that. Thank you. Yep. Uh, Good. I loved it. Thanks, Kimmy. Awesome. How long you been doing this? How long you been doing this? Did you start in Genesis? D Jones. No, I didn't start in Genesis. We started in Revelation. Oops. Like the idea. Nice. Yeah. Um, yeah. No, we started in Revelation, and then we went to Daniel, and then we went to Ruth, and then I think we're going to John. No Christian in the Old Testament either. Eh? Jesus saved my life too, Justine. I'm learning a lot from you. Thanks for these lessons. Yeah, man, absolutely. Did not start in Genesis. I love learning about Jesus. Me too, Karen. Thanks, Bridget. Don't think that I know everything, because I do not. Yeah, forgiven. Absolutely. My pleasure. I'm glad. I'm just pumped you guys are here, honestly. The false doctrine is the New Testament. Oof. Be careful, man. Be careful. Why such controversy about pre-trib stuff? Thank you. What's up, Drake? I don't know. People like thinking that they're the smartest people in the room, and then they like arguing their points on why they're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right or they're wrong. And I don't really see a point in it, because what that's taking is it's creating a barrier between you and I. Or like, let's say you believe in a post-trib and I believe in a pre-trib. Okay. Do we still believe in the gospel? Because if we do, then let's hug it out and let's go tell people about that. Because I'm never going to go up to somebody and be like, hey, can I tell you about why we're going to have to go through the tribulation? Like, no, I'm not going to go up and do that. So it just creates division, and I think that's all by design. Satan gets into religion, right? Like, all religion. Well, it's it's a relationship. It's a relationship with Christ, and that's what we should be chasing. And so if that's what you are chasing, it's going to be evident. And when you talk to people, if they start talking to you condescendingly, it kind of gives you insight on their heart. If they talk to you like I'm over you or I'm better than you, it gives you insight on their heart. If you see pride in how they talk, like, we're all prideful to some level, right? Like, it's just part of humanity. But you can quench all of those things, and you can let your light so shine before men as best as you possibly can. And so you got to be careful about those type of people, because there are a lot of them out here. So not a salvation issue. Yeah. Just got to be ready no matter what. Yeah. Thanks, Dora. I appreciate that. Hey, Drake. Hey. I just finished 1st and 2nd Samuel. Nice. Ooh, Galatians after John. Guys, you're great. Thanks, Trisha. I appreciate that. Thanks, Sandy. John's a longer one, but yeah, I think we can do that. Can you repeat the able and willing thing again? Able and willing. I don't know. Able and willing. Able and willing. Do you remember, Ash, what verse I was at when I said that? Jesus versus Boaz. Okay. Yeah, there's basically 3 things that needed to apply in order for that to occur, the Levirate marriage, right? Was that in Deuteronomy? You had to be Was it in Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10, I think, is what we were talking about there. But no, you had to be a near kinsman. You couldn't just be anybody. You had to be a near kinsman. You had to be able and you had to be willing to do it. Those are the things that needed to apply. So you couldn't just be anybody. You had to be a near kinsman. You had to be able to do it, to perform your duties, and then you had to be willing to do it, because you could say no if you wanted to. And thank heavens Jesus did not say no, because we would all be lost. Cologne, I'm going to mute you, man. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay. When you said Jesus is able and willing, hopefully that answers it for you. And if you guys have any questions, if you're interested in any of the other things, feel free to shoot me a message on here, because I can type it all out, and then that way you can have it or whatever. I can't type on here, so it's just me saying things, and I know it's hard to catch everything that I say, but I do post these up on YouTube. If you're interested in this, I have a little YouTube link in my TikTok profile, so if you just click on my little face right here, and then right under my profile picture, there's a link for YouTube, and I put all the Revelation, all the Daniel, and all the Ruth that we've done so far. All that's going to be up there too. So if you're interested, you can. Royal, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but definitely feel free to reach out and shoot me a message. You're never going to bother me. Thanks, Holly. Never going to bother me. Never. And just so you, and I said it before, but like when people do ask me questions, it challenges me, because I have to think, and I need to think. Like, I want to do that. I want to be mindful of these things, because it keeps me on my toes. So if you feel like, oh, I'm not going to message him because it'll be bothering him, don't. Like, look at it like you're sharpening me at the same time, because I need to know what I'm talking about. And then when I tell you, then you have an idea, and then we both are edified. It's awesome. It's what we're supposed to do. When will you be on again? I have no idea. I don't know. Hamburg, come on up.
Hello.
Well, hello.
So I've got a story. I know you like these stories. My friend, I've been talking to her for a long time. About Jesus, about God, about everything. And I was been talking to her for a long enough time that about 2 months ago, she decided she wanted to pray and accept Jesus, which was awesome. Oh, that was so awesome. But she's still a baby, and she's still drinking milk, and she's still, like, the majority of her family, I don't want to get in trouble for like hate speech, but the majority of her family read the New World Testament, or New World. Do you know which book I'm talking about? It's the book that came out in the 1960s. People generally tend to knock on your door every
Yeah,
Saturday.
Yep. That's what I was going to guess.
Okay. So I was talking to her, not yesterday, antier, so the day before yesterday. And she was like, "Oh, it's just easier for me to read the JW thing, because I can listen to it while I'm doing my dishes and this, that, and the other." Like, whoa! I go, I'd be dubious of a Bible that came out and this at this time, for a religion that came out at this time. And she was like, "Well, I read it. I read something, and they did it because people weren't following the Bible to the T." And I was like, "Whoa, you need to watch out with that. That's a slippery slope of not following the Bible to the T." And so I was like, that's adding something to Jesus, and God, Jesus plus anything is not salvation. It's Jesus, and you just need to work on yourself. And it was so. I'm gonna fast forward to yesterday. Why did I read Galatians? Because I'm doing my 6-month study, my book Bible reading, and I read Galatians. And then I called her. She didn't answer the phone, so I called her today. We were on the phone for like 4 hours, but I mean, it was amazing. And I was like, let me tell you what, I have to tell you what I read, because this happened the next day after we got off the phone. And I was like, this is what I'm reading to you. And she's like, oh my gosh. She goes, this is so helpful. She goes, yes, I think I'm going to start with Galatians, because she was trying to understand John. And she was like, it says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and it was flesh. And I was like, okay, well, what Bible are you reading? And I made her download YouVersion, which is what I use, and the Blue Letter Bible app, which is what you have made me now use.
Yeah.
And I use that more for Bible study school. So, and I explained it to her that way. But I had her reading it and we were going along with it. And I was like, see, she goes, but I don't get it. I was like, okay, let me say it again. And I did it again and again and again. Finally, she understood that the word was Jesus. She got confused because she's reading in John. And then right in verse 17 or 15, it says John again. And she's thinking it's John, the disciple. So I was like, oh, wait, no. If you want a history, go to Luke. Luke is a great one for history because that's like, the whole history. And then she
Yeah.
said she's gonna do Galatians. I'm just so happy for her. I'm trying to feed her as much as possible. And I use your line, which you actually got from the Bible, iron sharpens iron, because I was like, whenever you ask me questions, it makes me look in my Bible to look up the answers to the questions you have. So thank you. Don't ever think that I'm not, that you're bothering me. Oh, just like you literally just said that. But I always get hyped talking because I love talking about Jesus.
Yeah.
But it's so amazing. I just thought you would like to hear that. She's doing really, really well. She needs to find a church. I keep praying for her to find a good Bible-based church in Las Vegas.
Oh
And
man.
yeah, I
That,
mean, I go
that's
to a
really tough.
great church. Like I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed. We feed the children, we feed the teens, and he just goes expositionally by the Bible, which is awesome. So,
That
anywho,
is that's the way to go right there. Find you a church that goes through it expositionally, because if you don't, then you're gonna get a whole bunch of surface level like topic, like tip of the iceberg, like you don't go deep ever, and it's just like, oh, okay, we've been on this one verse for 5 weeks now. Can we get something else? Like, come on.
yeah,
Uh, it is such a dangerous thing because like the majority of people enjoy like these surface level-y type of vibes within these churches, and they're not getting any meat and potatoes. They're just getting milk, and I'm like, you need to grow.
yes.
um, but it's tough. It's hard. You have to really dive in and force yourself to read. People don't like reading, and they don't like studying. But if you train your mind, like what I always say, perspective is everything, right? Like if you train your mind to look at your Bible as this is everything, this is my lifeline, then you're going to treat it differently. You're going to look at this as a pile of gold instead of like, I have no idea where my Bible is right now. Like, so
I would literally cry if I lost my Bible. If something were to, there's like notes in there. There's like I would cry. I have found a way to write my notes down and then hot glue them into the where the chapter is, so that I have them when I go to them. So if I were to lose my Bible, I would cry, and
oh
I
man,
take it with me wherever I go
yeah.
because I might need it. I never know.
I'm about to put an air tag on this thing and just be like, I ain't losing it. I will hunt you down. Where I put my phone number in it just like a couple months ago because I was like, oh, if I ever lose this, they're probably gonna go to the front. So that's what I did.
I'm gonna get off really quick because I do have to go to sleep. But I wanted to two more things. My favorite verse in the Bible, which I tell every single person that I speak to several times, they must be sick of hearing it, is Proverbs 27:7. It's a satisfied soul loathes the honeycomb, but to a hungry soul every bitter thing is sweet. And I use this as a verse because people need to read the Bible right nowadays. That dude that was just here that somebody had to get out, like there's so much falseness, and they use just enough of the Bible to sound good. Um, so that's the one thing. Y'all read your Bible. My pastor always tells us read the Bible. What we get on Sunday is not the same thing. You have to read your Bible every day. You have to read your Bible for yourself. You're not going to have your pastor with you in front of Christ at the end of times. Anywho, um, also, it's a little funny, but on the front cover of my Bible, I wrote, well, not the front cover, but like inside, I put, aliens are not, the rapture is not aliens. Because I was like, if I get raptured, right? If it happens in our lifetime, if I get raptured and it happens in our lifetime, how cool would it be if somebody found my Bible with all, like, I'm telling you, Ryan, it's a lot of notes. If somebody were to find my Bible and get saved, that would be so cool. Anyway,
Yes,
I'm gonna go
that would.
because I do have church in the morning. But thank you, and you have a blessed night.
All right. All right. Thanks for coming up. Um, that's awesome. Do you guys have a study Bible for notes, highlights, and a clean Bible, or is it just me? That's a good question. My Bible, I have like I've learned to write real small, so that's what I do in mine, and it takes me a long time to write because I'm trying to be so neat, because I don't want to mess up. So one sentence takes me like 2 minutes to write, but if I write it in my Bible, it's important because the way my mind works is like I'll read something and I'll be like, what did I just read? But then when it clicks, I write it down in a certain kind of way to give me an idea on the side note. So then I say it in my words right next to it. So then when I read it, I'm like, oh, okay. And then I have an idea of what it's referring to. And I'm like, oh yeah, this. And like, then I can see it because sometimes I lose. It's hard to wrap your mind. It's hard to remember the context of everything. It's hard to remember who it's written for. Like, so constantly reminding you, like, okay, hey, Naomi, Jew, Ruth, Gentile. Like, you don't just go into this Bible reading Ruth knowing that. You have to write that down somewhere and be like, oh yeah, Ruth is a Gentile. Naomi's a Jew. Like, this is a whole situation here. That's not normal. And then when you dive into that kind of stuff, so I just write that stuff down. Um, I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's why I stopped going to Catholic Church over 30 years ago. I wanted to grow in the Word. Yeah, Catholics are very, very deceived for the most part. There are Christians that are Catholics. There are some, but the majority of Catholics, in my opinion, are lost. And it's the great part of the Great Deception. If you were here during the study of Revelation 17, chapter 17, you would understand a little bit on why, I guess. Was that part of the key of David that you were talking about? What do you mean? Was that part of the key of David? Key of David. Are you talking about the city? The city of David? Bethlehem? Bethlehem, Bethlehem, house of God, or house of bread. The key of David. I'm not remembering what you're talking about. Sorry. The key of David. Makes total sense. I also have this clear post. Okay, there you go. Yeah, whatever works for you. Um, but I kind of wanted to answer that key of David question if you wanted to reword it because I'm not exactly sure. Sorry. But guys, if you guys are new here, my name is Ryan, and we just finished up the book of Ruth. We'll probably go through the book of John next. I don't know when that's going to start. Honestly, I don't know. But we finished the book of Revelation, we finished the book of Daniel, and now we finished the book of Ruth. And I just want you to know that this whole reason I'm even here is to tell people about Jesus. Like that's it. That's the whole point of me being here. It's not for likes or gifts or anything like that, like some other people on TikTok. So be careful on who you follow, who you listen to. But the whole reason I'm here is to point you to Jesus Christ, because I need you to understand the only way to heaven is one way alone, and that is by understanding and believing that Jesus Christ is God's Son, that He led us in this life, that He died on the cross, rose again on the third day, and the Bible says, for whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. It is your belief in Christ, that He was enough. It's not about getting baptized. Baptism doesn't save you. There are people out here, I was in the live the other night where he's like, you need to be baptized in order to get to heaven. And I'm just like, so Christ wasn't enough? So Jesus wasn't enough? So Him dying on the cross wasn't enough? And I'm just like, so I always tell people first base, like, a baseball diamond, first base, second base, third base, home plate. First base is Christ and Christ alone. That is how you get saved. Understanding that you are a sinner, understanding that you need saved, and that whosoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. You put your faith in Christ. That's what you do. That's how you get saved. Boom. You ask Him to forgive you, and you put your faith in Him. Boom. Second base would be baptism. Baptism does not save you. Baptism just lets everybody know that you are now following Christ. That's what you're doing. It does not save you. So it's important to understand. Third base would be doing good works. Good works do not save you. The Bible says, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. So it's not about being a good person to get to heaven. No, it's about what first base was. First base was Christ and Christ alone, what he did on the cross. Second base, baptism, doesn't save you. Third base, good works, doesn't save you. Home plate, telling others about Jesus. That's the way I go about it. Oh, yeah. Gotta get on base. That's right.
Hi.
Hi.
So what I was talking about with the key of David, and I am Christian, and I've been on my walk pretty hardcore the past year, but I honestly do not know the word that well because I wasn't brought up, reading my Bible. I've been trying to catch up, but a friend of mine had told me that I had to understand the key of David when we were talking about Revelation, and it wasn't clear, and they didn't really explain what they were talking about. And I've been trying to find that. And so it has to do with the tribulation, but I don't know what they're talking about.
So the key of David, yeah, it rings a bell, but do you have a verse where it's found?
Well, when I had clicked on a minute ago and you were talking about um, the genealogy of who is who in the church, I thought that that was something like where that was headed, but it's
Oh,
a little confusing.
okay, yeah. If you find, because I know the word, the phrase "key of David" is in the Bible somewhere. I remember seeing it. I can't remember where. I don't think it's applicable in the Book of Revelation, at least that I can, because there's a key that was given to this fallen angel, which a lot of people think is Lucifer. He opens up the bottomless pit, so a key was given to him. Trying to think of another key in the Book of Revelation. The only key that comes to mind is the key that is given that is used to open the bottomless pit. So yeah, I can't think. If I wasn't on my phone right now, I'd be able to look up and find that for you. But as far as my knee-jerk reaction going to, hey, key of David and tribulation, nothing's coming to mind.
It
Um,
kind of, I think we were talking about following false prophets
Revelation
and
3, Revelation 3:7. Oh, somebody just said, thank you, Ash. Let me go there real fast. Revelation 3:7. Okay. So Revelation 3:7, this is the letter to the Philadelphia church. It says, "And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these things says, he who is holy, he who is true, he who has the key of David, he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens." Okay. So that is so okay. So Isaiah 22:20. Hold on. We're chasing this down. Oh, okay. Yeah, Isaiah 22:20. Okay, so in Isaiah 22:20 is where this whole picture comes into play. So if you go to Isaiah 22:20, what the story here, Isaiah 22, verse 15 through 25. If you want to write that down, you can read it yourself. Isaiah 22:15 to the end of the chapter. So Isaiah 15 or 22:15 through 25. But basically, the story there is that you're introduced to a guy named Eliakim. And Eliakim, he was the treasurer for the king. And so he would walk around with this gigantic, like, I want you to picture like this big old thing on this dude's arm, like shoulder slung over like this. Like, this was how he held his king, like, or he had a key. It was attached to this thing. So everybody saw that he had this thing slung over his shoulder, and on the end of it was a key. And so that is the picture here, because that was emblematic of that he alone you had to go through Eliakim in order to go to the king. Okay, and so when you read Isaiah 22, 20 through 25, you're introduced to um, there's a type of Jesus Christ in there. He's referred to the peg because that if you can look at it, you'll find it yourself if you look at it. But the peg is Jesus, and then it says he'll be cut down. But go to Isaiah 22 verse 22. Isaiah chapter 22 verse 22. It says this: the key of the house of David I will lay on his shoulder, so he shall open and no one shall shut, and he shall shut and no one shall open. I will fasten him as a peg in a secure place, and he will become a glorious throne to his father's house. So that peg is representing Jesus Christ, who has not been born yet. Like this is a prophecy that's going to be fulfilled. But listen, in verse 24, it says, "They will hang on him all the glory of his father's house, the offspring and the posterity, all vessels of small quantity, from the cups to all the pitchers. In that day, says the Lord of hosts, the peg that is fastened in the secure place will be removed and be cut down and fall, and the burden that was on it will be cut off, for the Lord has spoken." So you can see how that is very idiomatic of what Jesus did. So it's a prophecy. So that's what that's referring to. It brings it back. So everything in the book of Revelation comes back to the Old Testament in a lot of different ways. That's why, in order to understand the book of Revelation, you have to have a good understanding of the rest of the Bible. There's so much here. There's a lot of stuff that I don't even know. A lot of things that I've missed that I'll probably never find myself. But there's things that just pop up all the time, and I'm just like, that's amazing. I love finding this stuff. But here, hopefully, this clears some of that up, or at least gives you some place to start looking for yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. And isn't it just a blessing that when you ask him to show you something, it happens. He shows you. It might not be instantly, but a lot of times it is. So it's a
Yeah,
blessing, and praise the Lord. So thank
very
you.
cool, very cool. Yep. Yeah, if you have any questions, just shoot me a message. I would love to talk to you.
All right, thank you. Bye bye.
All right, see ya. Thank you. Thanks, Ash. I appreciate that. It sounded familiar. Man, that would drives me nuts. Um, yay. um, the thrones of the house of David. Um, uh, pray for my sister sitting in the ICU praying for a miracle. What's going on, Julian? Praying for my sister. Yeah. What's her name, if you don't mind? Wendy, hello. Oh, no. Jocelyn. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry about that. That's very, very tough. Um, Hi, Becca. Man, sorry. That is terrible. Wendy, are you at work? And yes, you missed it. We finished. We finished the book of Ruth. Don't worry, it wasn't that good. It's gonna be up on YouTube if you wanna watch it later. I'm just kidding. It was amazing. I'm just trying to make you feel not that bad. Um, but yeah, I'm sorry about that, Julianne. It was great. Thanks, Shelba Fox, always coming in just super in and out. She's always there and super encouraging, and I appreciate that a lot. Um, God, I missed part of it. Yeah, I'll put it up, David, if you're interested. Um, but I want you guys to go into bed now. It's almost 2 a.m. here in church at 9:30. Have a blessed night. Thanks, Belle. Thanks for being here. Hope to see you next time. Um, thought it was. I hope you guys keep praying for Israel, because what I want you guys to understand right now is that one reason why. So America is not in the Bible. And if it is, it's hidden in a roundabout way. Like some people theorize that, hey, this could be it, like the Lions of Tarshish, but let's just say that America is not in the Bible. One reason why I think, and many others agree, that we have been blessed in this country as much as we have been is because of the promise that was back in Genesis. I want to say like 13, maybe 12 or 13, but basically where God says to Abraham, he's like, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And so America has been a huge advocate and a hedge of protection for Israel. And right now we are still backing them for the most part. But what I need you to understand is, for the first time ever in American history, at least to my knowledge, is that there is now a county in, it's either a county or a city, it's Richmond in California, who is completely 100% against Israel for the first time. And that's scary, because now you're going to start, everything that happens in California and everything that happens in New York starts to spread inward into the states. And you're already seeing it all over the place. You're seeing a huge, like in New York City, for example, they just took over that massive train station. What is that, Grand Central? With pro-Palestinian protests right now. That's in New York City. You're seeing all kinds of pro-Palestine or Palestine protests all over the place in America. You're seeing it all over the place. There's another line in the sand. It's another, you're either this side or that side. You're either left or right, Democrat, conservative, Republican. It's all division. And now you're seeing another one. You're either pro-Israel or you're pro-Palestine. And right now, America is now not fully behind Israel. So pray for Israel. Pray for America. Guys, there is power in prayer, as we talked about before. Praying is such a superhero type tool that you have at your disposal. And you need to understand that, because going back into the Old Testament, they had to go through certain avenues in order to get their prayers sent up. It's not like how it is right now. It's not. Like, we have the ability. The Holy Spirit lives within us. I need you to understand that that is massive. Massive. The temple, the first temple, was destroyed. It was a tragedy for the Jewish people. The second temple was built, then it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Massive hit to the Jewish people, because they are still under the law. But for you and I, it doesn't apply. We don't mind, because we are not saved by sacrifices, because Jesus paid it all. The Jewish people, missed it. They are still looking for the Mashiach, the Messiah. They are still looking for him to arrive. So to them, their great struggle, their major dilemma that the Jewish people have is, how do they lament for the people's sins? Because there is no temple, so they can't do sacrifices. In order to do sacrifices, there need to be a temple. And that's why it's crazy, because all of this talk about this third temple, they have all the things in order to build it. They have the high priest, the garb, the instruments, all of these red heifers. They have everything. They're just waiting for the green light. But my point is that we need to pray for them. We need to pray for us, because there is power in prayer. If you were here during our study of Daniel, you already know that. Daniel was praying for 21 days, and then finally the angel showed up, and he's like, I tried to get here 20 days ago. And because of your words, I am here. Wow, what amazing insight. So pray. Pray earnestly. Pray for those people. Pray for what's going on over there. It's not real to you. It's not real because it's not directly affecting you. But it's coming to a city near you. It seems like it, at least. And I don't want to be, pushing fear or anything like that. That's not my intent, but I'm just trying to be realist. And I think, prayer is a big reason why, the Christian Christians in this world, we are that dam holding back all the waters, the bad things in the world. But there are a lot of holes where water is just getting through like all over the place. And right when the rapture happens, the water's just going to go through and it's just going to be all out terribleness on this world. And the world's going to get what it wants. So prayer can have a lot to do with restraining certain things within this world. So keep that in mind. Coffee Queen, thanks for being here. I appreciate that. What should we exact prayer be about? Wendy, pray for the I guess that's an interesting question. Pray for Israel, obviously. Pray for them. Pray for everything going on over there with the wars. Pray that America continues to back them 100%. I see a time coming to where America will not back them, and that's actually prophetic in a sense in the book of Zechariah, where it says all nations coming against them, which is wild. But I think that prayer can delay that kind of stuff and push it back. So pray for America, the safety of America. But pray for our leaders, even though they are completely lost. It's crazy, but that doesn't mean that we don't pray for them. It doesn't mean. And honestly, while you're doing that, what you're doing is you are sharpening yourself. When you pray, you are enlisting yourself into God's plans, because God is already going to do everything that is set in motion is already going to come to be. So when you pray, what you're doing is you are enlisting yourself into his plans. It's essentially, you're a soldier, you're a foot soldier here. Too much coffee will keep you up all night. Ayo. I can't forgive this friend that tore me up yesterday, said horrible things to me. I'm so upset. Wendy, I don't know your situation, but when you say you can't forgive, I think it's important to remember, and this is why it's important to know who Jesus is. Study him, because then you will be more like him. But when Jesus was dying on the cross, when he was getting hit, when he was getting beaten, he wasn't saying, I'm never going to forgive you for this. When he was getting nailed to the cross, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He was praying for them while he was going through the worst things ever. And I need you to understand that. So if you are a Christian, if you are trying to be Christ-like, forgiveness is a natural byproduct of that. So, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but just think about it. Pray about that, because forgiveness is essential. It's very, very important. Yeah, Michelle, I think so too. Michael Bunel. I think we are the restrainer as well. The restrainer is the Holy Spirit, but when the restrainer is removed, that's emblematic of the church at that point. Yes, I pray several times a day. I guess I'll pray for support of God's will, whatever that may be. Yeah, Wendy, the more you know in the world, the more you can pray. But there's, all kinds of terrible pictures. I don't know if you guys went to my TikTok page. I posted a little clip of another dude. It's probably like my 5th video down, but it's labeled The Mentality of Hamas, and it's about one of the Hamas guys going into Israel, and they actually end up calling his parents, and it's all recorded, and he's just cheerfully and gleefully bragging about how many civilians, Israeli, Jewish people he's killed. And you should listen to it, because it'll open up your eyes to see what kind of things that are happening on over there, and it's heartbreaking. So I would encourage you to listen to that, just so you can understand a little bit better. But the more you know, the more specifically you can pray, and the more specifically you pray, the more intense your prayers become. Yeah. Forgiveness is for you, not the other person. Yeah, if you saw it, Shelba, then you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Feeling defeated, then I remember what Jesus. Clarity, direction, discernment, courage, discipline, patience, mercy. There you go. Those are amazing things to pray for right there. great things that I as well, and I throw wisdom in there as well. Um, but I'm gonna get on out of here, guys. I appreciate you guys being here. Um, Before I go, I need you to know for sure. I want you guys so bad to know Jesus. I don't want you to think or maybe hope or guess that you are born again. I want you to know it. And I want you to dive in as much as you possibly can if you are unsure. If there is ever just a little hesitation on maybe I'm not, lock it down, because the time we're coming down to it, guys. I really truly believe that we could be seeing the rapture in my lifetime sometime. I'm not gonna say it's gonna happen tomorrow, but it could happen before I get off of here. But know Jesus, know what he did, know that he is the only way to heaven. Put your faith in Jesus. It's not by being a good person. Ephesians 2:8-9, for by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. He died for you. He died for me. He's not willing that any should perish, but he is the only way. It's not him and a baptism. It's not Jesus and a good works. It is Christ and Christ alone. Then you move on from there and do the things that you should be doing as a child of God. But yeah, all this will be up on YouTube, Jetta. That's in my, if you click on my TikTok profile, you can see my YouTube link in there. And I'm working on that Discord, so I know some of you guys are interested in that, and so I might post that in there. I still am trying to figure it out myself, so I don't really know what I'm doing on Discord. So I'm a complete rookie with all this stuff. So get on base and you can go home. That's right. Not me trying to put rapture on my vital sheet instead of injuries. Rapture. Oh man, what a day that will be. Our blessed hope, guys. I mean, I'm telling you what, get pumped for it, because when you get excited, when you dive more into this, then it's going to be coming out of your mouth. You're like, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Like, the more you pour good in, the more good comes out. The more filth you listen to, like rap or whatever, the more that comes out. The more Jesus that you put in, the more Jesus comes out. It's just a natural byproduct. It's not difficult to understand. So you need to get more of him and just marinate in that. But go to your YouTube. All right. But yeah, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. I'd love to talk to you, but I am out of here. When does John start? I don't know yet. Sometime next week. I'll probably put it as a story if you are interested. It'll be up there. Whenever I go live, typically a couple hours before I go live, I'll put something up on my story. So hopefully that'll reach out to you guys. And if you ever miss one, it'll be up on YouTube. So, all right, guys, you guys have a good night. I'll see you.